Okay, well, thank you, Maure and Sepideh, for inviting me to speak to this very interesting multidisciplinary group. My talk is divided in three parts. The first part documents how I became interested in this topic of sex and technology. The second part addresses the existential and psychoanalytic my thinking about this curious combo. And the third part, I will present the new sexual landscape that has resulted from the marriage of sex and technology. Okay, so I'll dive into part one, which is my story. Okay. How did a nice girl like you end up studying and writing about sex dolls and robots? I've been asked this question a number of times, and I invite all of you to accompany me on my journey, describing how it all happened. My interest in sex and technology began with a patient I had, whom I'll call Jack. He came to me for treatment and soon revealed that after 2 heartbreaks, he had taken to living with a doll. He called her Maya. He loved this doll, and the doll provided him with enough companionship to ease his loneliness and sense of exile. Some of you may have seen the film Lars and the Real Girl, where it depicts Lars's relationship with a sex doll. I will show you pictures of men with their dolls. All of them are authentic, but none of them are of my patient, just so you know. In having sex and developing a relationship with the doll, Jack gained some confidence. But after a while, he felt like he was copping out. He began to feel uncomfortable with his object choice. I've never liked that psychoanalytic term, object choice, but it's becoming more and more applicable in our advanced age of technology. Through the course of treatment, I helped Jack find his way back to intimacy with a human woman, because this is what he truly wanted. From my research, as you will see, I learned that this is not what all men who choose inanimate love objects want. More about that later. It took Jack a while to transition back to human love because his self-esteem had been so badly damaged by a cruel mother and 2 wives. He had been made to feel that he was never enough of a man to please the women in his life. He didn't wish to get hurt again, but continued to long for female company. And he found the answer to his dilemma in a humanoid doll. The doll fulfilled his sexual needs and allowed him to avoid the demeaning and unpredictable drama that had characterized his previous relationships. I was initially puzzled and a bit put off by Jack's choice of a doll for a love and sex partner. I'm a feminist, and I saw this as the ultimate objectification of women. Here was a perversion, I told myself, thinking of Freud's description of a fetish as the disavowal of the difference between the sexes. We have entered a new world, I thought, in which perversion now involves the disavowal of the human, the difficulty distinguishing between human and non-human. Jack knew he was living with a doll, yet when he spoke of her, he did so as if he were describing a live woman. The line between doll and human was very thin, and he sometimes crossed it. One day, Jack said something that might be thought of as the best argument for resorting to doll or robot love. He said, "Kids believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Most people believe in God. Almost everyone needs an imaginary friend in their corner, even though they have no physical evidence. of that friend's existence. Well, I have concrete evidence of my friend's existence. Did you see that movie, he asked? The one with Tom Hanks, Castaway. With the blood of his hands, the character Chuck Noland accidentally gives a volleyball a face. And then he names it Wilson. Not very imaginative, since the Wilson Company makes the ball. But over time, Wilson becomes real to him. And he comes to love Wilson and believes Wilson cares about him. After a while, you get the feeling that he's forgotten that Wilson is just a doll. A ball, sorry. We're getting to the doll. Anything can become alive if you're lonely enough. And let me tell you something, Doc. That's what he called me, Doc. You don't have to be stranded on an island to be a castaway. Each of us is a kind of island already. And this love we're all looking for and want, it's as much an act of imagination as it is an act of discovery. I was stunned by Jack's words. It sounded as if he had read Winnicott. Yet hadn't his doll become a kind of transitional object, a soothing object that protected him from worldly pain? As he came to better understand the pain he felt at the hands of the women in his life and the anger he harbored as a result of it, and as I became a witness to and container of that pain, Jack began to move away from the object world and toward the human. Rather than breathe life into a non-human object to protect himself from relational anguish, he was now ready to emerge from his omnipotent psychic retreat and engage in human relatedness, with all the messiness, pain, and joy it entails. Freud famously wrote, "Where id was, there ego shall be." More recently, Jessica Benjamin wrote, "Where objects were, their subjects must be." A phrase I believe aptly sums up the evolution of my treatment with Jack. I knew that he had fostered his use of the doll as a transitional object to help him become comfortable with a real woman, one he had less control over. I also realized that I had become the most significant transitional object for Jack, since I came to represent the transitional space between being with his doll and being with a real woman, knowing the challenges and pitfalls that may involve. As Gorin and Levy-Warren have noted, psychoanalysis can serve as a potent antidote to technological commodification in present-day society. Jack was so moved by my acceptance of him and my lack of judgment for his choice of love object that before letting go of his doll, he wished to bring it to my office so that I could meet it, that is, bear witness to the fact that he had bonded with the object of his projections and that there was pain in letting it go. I acquiesced because my conscious aim was to help Jack relinquish his fantasy regarding his doll by seeing the doll as a real object in an actual shared space, thereby facilitating the onset of a mourning process. I believe now that I also wished to meet the third member of our therapy menage in person. I had heard so much about Maya. I was curious to see the real thing before she was to take her place in the closet. I guess you could call it an enactment. The encounter was memorable. And I'm going to show you 2 slides of men carrying these dolls who weigh between 80 and 100 pounds, just to show you that it's very difficult to maneuver them. They're very heavy. They're put in wheelbarrows or wheelchairs, usually, to move. So when Jack picked Maya up and sat her on the couch next to him, I gazed at her, frankly astonished. She looked almost, but not exactly, like a beautiful young woman. There she sat, with a passive, frozen expression, a full-grown sister of Barbie, a glistening Galatea, the archetype of womanly beauty, with her thick, wild mane of auburn hair and huge almond-shaped green eyes and plump-lipped sensual mouth. Her hourglass body matched the cultural ideal of feminine beauty. Her hands and feet were fine and delicately crafted, and her well-shaped nails were polished in hot pink. Intensely curious, I wanted to see her naked, but of course that was out of the question. There's a limit to my enactments. The scene felt uncanny, the two of us talking about Jack's letting go of someone who was not someone. This beautiful container for fantasy, a lifeboat cast upon the lonely sea of existence. Yet as the session continued, I relaxed. He was not letting go of something, I told myself. Rather, he was retrieving something, a hope, a dream, a quest for love, withdrawing it from the doll and bringing it back into himself. Now he could be enough, at least enough to try again with a live woman. Though I had wished to help Jack see his doll as a non-human object, he helped me to see her as much more than a doll. For an uncanny moment, I saw Jack touching a real woman. I sharply drew in a breath to ease my shock, because for that split second, it felt as if I had directly experienced his love for the doll. This is not Jack, as I told you. This is Dave Cat, who lives, I'll talk about him in a little while, but this is his doll wife with whom he's lived for over 20 years. And I'm showing you these images so you can see what I saw with Jack and Maya, the love that one can experience with a doll. I also experienced more directly than ever before how all people and things we love live inside us and are nurtured by the flesh of memory and the blood of imagination. Everything, whether we admit it or not, is colored by projection and fantasy. How much is too much? We rarely know for sure. While I treated Jack, I wished to learn more about the development of love and sex with inanimate objects. I visited doll forums. The most popular at the time was called Hello Dolly. I learned that men like Jack are called idolaters, and that there exists a sizable community to which they belong. I interviewed 15 men who live with dolls and love them. I'm going to show you some slides that these men shared with me. And some of them consider themselves amateur photographers. They enjoy photographing the dolls or themselves with their dolls. Notice the tenderness. This man married a doll. I was consulting producer on a documentary film on this subject called Silicon Soul. I visited Abyss Creations, the factory where the Rolls-Royce of dolls are made. These are some photos that I took at the factory. You can see all the different shapes and sizes. They can be custom made according to the person, the customer's desires. They take about 80 hours to make one doll. I interviewed the creator, Matt McMullen. At first, Mr. McMullen said he wanted to avoid what's called the uncanny valley. That is the point at which one feels revulsion when dolls and robots become too lifelike. This is a toy, he told me emphatically. This is a diversion. This is entertainment. And yet, this is a doll he made of himself, by the way. And yet, a few years later, McMullen added AI to his dolls, essentially transforming them into humanoid robots. This is not the robot. This is. You can't tell because unless you're interacting with the doll, you don't know that she can speak and interact. Now he says, I want people to develop an emotional attachment, not only to the doll, but the actual character behind it, to develop love for this being. It seems McMullen was clearly aware of the profound and contradictory dialectic that he hoped would exist in his customers' relationships with their dolls when he named his product Real Doll, one word, Real Doll. The amalgamated word, an oxymoron, unites the double layers of consciousness. She is real and she is a doll. She is simultaneously human and non-human. I traveled to Michigan to conduct a 7-hour interview with Dave Cat, perhaps the world's best-known idolater, in his home. You saw pictures of him before. Unlike Jack, who wished to leave his doll behind, Dave Cat has no such desire. He lives happily with his 5 dolls, one to whom he has been married for over 20 years, the one with purple hair. Dave Cat has become a spokesperson and activist who views his mission as that of, quote, spreading the gospel of the synthetic option. He considers himself an idolater and a robosexual. Like Jack, Dave Cat had several disappointments with women, yet unlike Jack, he was always drawn to inanimate objects. Since childhood, he preferred things to people and fantasy to reality. As soon as he saved enough money, he bought himself a store mannequin. You always know where you are with a thing, he explained to me. Not surprisingly, his apartment was filled with objects reminiscent of a child's room, including action figures, Lego sculptures, and videos about robots and anime. I don't know why this doesn't go easily. This is from his home. You can see a lot of toys. I couldn't help recall the words of French psychoanalyst Janine Chesquet-Smiriel. Puppets, mannequins, waxworks, automatons, dolls, painted scenery, plaster casts, dummies, secret clockworks, mimesis, and illusion all form a part of the fetishist's magic and artful universe. Lying between life and death, animated and mechanic, hybrid creatures and creatures to which hubris gave birth, they all may be likened to fetishes. And as fetishes, they give us, for a while, the feeling that a world not ruled by our common laws does exist, a marvelous and uncanny world. Dave Cat described his love at first sight that he felt when he initially saw Shidore, his first doll, who later became his wife. In black lingerie, holding a single purple artificial rose in her delicate hand, he was speechless. She came out of the crate resembling a casket, he said, and we looked into each other's eyes, and we knew this was going to be an amazing thing. A highly creative person, Dave Cat embarked on his own Pygmalion fantasy. That's the box they come in. Like the Cypriot king, who sculpted his ideal woman and then fell in love with her, Dave Cat fashioned the woman of his dreams. He created an ideal personality for Shidore. She's a positive, sarcastic, unique individual, he said. She's always trying to get people to see the other side of things. She's always trying to open people's minds up to things. I observed symbiosis in how Dave Cat spoke for Shidore and Shidore spoke for Dave Cat. He told me Shidore is a fantastic listener and a bit of an exhibitionist, and that he has to restrain her from exposing herself too frequently. Like his other dolls, Shidore has her own Twitter account, which of course he writes, where of course she is an advocate for artificial love. Since 1998, when he first received Shidore, she has had 4 bodies. Most recently, he ordered the head with AI. He told me that he rarely turns on the AI, which reminded me of Jack's words, "A silent wife is a gift from the Lord." When I asked Dave Cat how he accounts for the longevity of his relationship with Shidore, he replied without hesitation, "We have a policy of never going to bed angry, and it's gone quite well so far. But it's just the fact that I think on my end, at the very least, I can't really speak for her, wink, wink. It's just that I always know that Chichan, his pet's name for her, will always be there for me. She will always be an amazing companion in my ups and downs. I'll always have someone wonderful to come home to, and I won't have to worry about her manipulating my emotions for her own end. I won't be lied to. She'll never cheat on me, and she'll never criticize me. And at the very least, the least I can do for such wonderful behavior is say, you know what? She is the one for me. She is my wife, and quite literally, she wouldn't be here without me, and quite literally, I wouldn't be as content as I am without her." When Dave Cat said wink, wink, he was referring to the fact that although he knows Shidora is a doll, he treats her as if she is human, complete with personality and tastes of her own. They were matching wedding rings with the words "synthetic love lasts forever," revealing one of the functions of doll love, the battle with mortality and change. Which brings me to part 2 of my talk, technology and sex. This is the most theoretical part of the talk. Key to understanding the relationship between humans and technology and how it functions in erotic life is the recognition that technology is born of vital need. From fashioning the stone axe to building the CERN particle accelerator, the tech enterprise is rooted in an ontological orientation based on original anxiety about limitation and how it might be transcended. Our occupation as a species has been consistently technical, meaning we have always naturally been at war with limitation. Thus, we fashion objects like tools and machines to engage and transcend limitation in the form of threat, lack, and mortality itself, while also using them to provide stimulation, novelty, and pleasure. From a psychoanalytic perspective, technology can be understood as the mechanization of the pleasure principle, maturely informed by the reality principle, the seeking of pleasure while avoiding pain, but in the epistemological context of better understanding natural reality so as to utilize natural law for human benefit. Technology is a kind of overcoming of limitation and disaster. Sex, too, is an overcoming of trauma and death. Both sex and technology are concerned with the trauma of limitation and the limitation of trauma, the hunger for novelty and fresh experience, and most of all, the irrepressible desire for beyondness, that singular driving force pushing back against death that says, I want to be more than I am, and I wish to continue. Both sex and technology confer great benefits and great dangers, and both, when they are worthwhile, can involve great risk. Technology emerges and exists on the border of a fundamental human conflict. We emerge from nature, yet we push back against nature. We oppose the limits nature exerts on us. It is natural for us to be limited, both physically and mentally, and it is natural for us to technologically extend our sensoriums, our bodies, and our minds, as AI is doing so well right now. It is natural to suffer limits and to die, and it is natural to arm ourselves against threat, limitation, and death. I don't know how many of you know this, but Google is involved in an enterprise aimed at overcoming the problem of death. And so across this divide of natural process, the biological ones from which emerge a human animal having a self, and the psychological and social one that follows the self in civilizing and refining the life of the human animal, we necessarily bring the unnatural into being. We do technological things whose ethical outcomes are uncertain and often have unexpected or unfortunate consequences. So, for example, the pollution of the natural surround, the mass destruction of other species, catastrophic climate change, biological and nuclear warfare, ethical monstrosities revolving around genetic science, the cyborg, the human machine hybrid. This is a man who's colorblind and had something, a device inserted into his brain that delivers tones instead of colors, so that he knows how to identify colors. And this is a man who's had an brain implant for 7 years that reads his mind and can play video games, for example, with that artificial limb, just based on reading his mind. And so forth. We can call these all perversions of a kind. Because why perversion? Because they're going against the natural way. That's been the traditional definition of perversion. Now, what I've said about technology, that it exists along a split between the human animal and the human self, that it opposes limitation and hungers for transcendence, and that it brings the unnatural into existence, applies as well to sex. Sex is an animal act that itself extends the species, and yet for us it is so much more, serving psychological purposes, which more than 100 years of psychoanalysis has explored with no hint of exhaustion. Human sex cannot simply be reduced to anatomy and evolution, for it exceeds both in the scope of its meaning. Sex is a physical drive and the act at the heart of procreation for the human animal. But eros, the humanization of sex, and the source of attraction and the desire for love and bonding, as well as the craving for power and control, is the province of selfhood, highly individualized and animated by every aspect of the human drama. In its erotic, symbolic dimension, sex marks and challenges individual limitation. It seeks novelty, thus breaking the limits of the tried and true. It attempts to work out conflicts associated with forbidden desires and historical suffering, traumas, making reparation with or taking revenge against figures from one's past, especially one's earliest caregivers. Like technology, sex is at war with death, not simply because it can lead to new life, but because it can take us beyond the self, momentarily shattering the finitude that haunts our individual existence. At its best, sex is a transcendence experience that plunges one into bliss, a bliss-saturated totality that defies description. At its worst, it is a tedious, boring, mechanical, or even perverted to the point of harm, terrifying, and even lethal. Sex is capable of enshrining death as well as celebrating life. Like technology, it can bring perversion, the unnatural, into existence. And because sex represents and symbolizes so much and can go wrong in so many ways, it speaks largely in the language of fantasy. This is summed up in the old saw that the brain is the major sex organ of human beings. Beyond our animal suffering, we suffer to exist as a self, to make sense of what happens to us, to make sense of what we do, to stand out, to mean something, to be a contender. And all this beneath the ever-present shadow of doom. However good that night, we tend not to go gently into it, and therefore find ourselves inherently in profound conflict with the limitations of nature. She may be indifferent, but we are not. To be a conscious animal is to be concerned, not concerned like the twitchy prey animals on the veld, nervously scanning for the predator to avoid dying in its mouth, but consciously concerned with the production of one's future as free from threat as possible. However much we need limits to live, we also need to extend them. As a species, we do this in every way we can, socially, culturally, sexually, and of course, technologically. We use our machines to avoid threat, to create novel possibilities, to produce the future, which is the most important of all limits. Our machines and their use shape self-view, society, and culture. Think of the television and automobile, eventually becoming so sophisticated. Think of the microchip, that they can change what it means to be human, as for instance, when we begin to place them inside our bodies, which we saw soon, which Neuralink, Elon Musk's company Neuralink, is doing now, placing them in the brain. I have sometimes thought of technology as amusingly having a subtext, something like a Dear John letter to nature. It goes something like this. Dear nature, I'm sorry, but I must leave you behind. Though you once seemed to be there for me, so much so that I worshiped you in various ways, I find that lately you have been getting in the way. In fact, in originally granting me barely enough life to reproduce while I suffered countless miseries, you were minimal at best. You were wonderful for what you were, so it's not you, it's me. It may be selfish, but I just want so much more. This is simply what happens when a species like mine evolves sufficient capacity to speak, solve problems, and imagine better ways of doing things. Of course, my love, we will never fully let go of one another. You will always be a part of me, and I will be with you forever. Human beings are in a constant state of natural deviation from the very norms they establish for themselves. Yes, we are natural deviants. We cannot stay the natural course if the natural course forbids transgression against its limits. Deviance lies at the root. The who that emerges from the what of nature is the original transgression. Think of the myth of Adam and Eve, with Eve defying God's limit setting by biting into the apple, ushering in nakedness and consciousness, which is inevitably accompanied by human suffering. Standing out of and against what once was considered unnatural and making room for new ways of being in the world. And what is at the very heart of being unnatural? The goal is obvious, even if rarely stated, to become gods of our own existence or to die trying. This has become very evident in our age of AI. A machine is no accident of nature. It is not arbitrary, nor a matter of chance. It does not evolve out of random mutation and selection. It is intended and has an assigned purpose. It fits within a plan. It has a telos. We build it in our own image, designed for our enslavement of it. We control our technology, repair it, improve it, replace it with more advanced and novel machinery. Technology, all of it, from the wheel to advanced AI, is the totem of our greatest power, wielding the real magic of turning the tables on the arbitrary nature of nature. Ultimately, we use it to defend us against limitation and death. Sex does this as well, though in a literal and symbolic manner. Sex possesses the power of procreation and combines symbolic meaning with animal energy like no other human act. The perverse aspect of sex transcends the limits of the mechanical aspect of its procreative function, and the mechanical aspect of technology transcends the limits of natural functions, the sensorium, locomotion, capacity for work, mind, etc. The link between these two domains is profound as it is far-reaching. So how does this connection between sex and technology apply on the ground? That is what I want to talk now. How are our communication technologies a mere subset of the big picture, transforming the landscape of human sexuality and love? So now I move to part 3 of my talk, the 50 Shades of Upgrade, the new sexual landscape that is emerging. Charles Seif, an NYU professor, has said that behind every new technology, there is someone trying to have sex with it. It's no surprise then that the earliest stone dildo found to date is some 30,000 years old. Emily Witt has called ours a time of unprecedented erotic possibility, novel erotic scenarios and computer technologies co-developed when computers first became available to the wider public. Quick access to porn through the internet first implicated the computer as an instrument of human sexuality. Some people would say there would be no internet without porn. Today, we can state unequivocally that internet porn shapes the sexuality of younger generations who are exposed to it around the ages of 9 to 11. Just as the infant and young child require parental mirroring to internalize a sense of themselves that evolves into body image and self-integrity and identity, the pubertal child and adolescent also seek mirroring to make sense of the titanic changes taking place in their bodies. Because so many young children are glued to their computers and smartphones, that is where this mirroring takes place. Social media is influential in this process, but so is internet porn. Computers made possible not only the private viewing of such content, but the sharing of it among users, which led to the establishment of virtual communities whose common interests revolve around certain sexual themes. Here began the earliest development of cybersex. As this became prevalent, perverse sexual enactments, always a part of individual fantasy, spilled into mass consciousness, shifting norms toward what could be called more deviant ends. Now, I'm using the words, just so you know, I'm using the words perversion and deviant in quotations. You don't see that because their definitions are constantly altering and relative to cultural contexts. The sexual brain is far from being politically correct, write Ogas and Gadam, researchers of sexual desire who followed and analyzed 1 billion internet searches and 40,000 of the most trafficked websites. They found that sexist, racist, incestuous, and pedophilic pornography is very prevalent and popular on the internet. Cybersex, a premier example of the technologization of sex, has exploded over the last few decades. A computer-mediated interactive erotic experience involving 2 or more participants having real-time sexual exchanges, online supplements, real-world erotic encounters, or replaces them entirely. For some, though the partner is not physically present and may even be anonymous, the emotion of love can be experienced as fully and as intensely as in an offline relationship. It's similar to what we saw with the doll love. I'm going to quote you a quote from Ben Zeev, who studied cybersex. He said, "People in cyber love will refer to their cyber mates or even their online spouses. People have even got cyber married and vowed to remain faithful to each other. Some women have claimed that they do not want to engage in cybersex with the first person who asks them, since they want to save their virtual virginity for the right man. Similarly, some say they do not want to have a one-night cyber stand, but rather wish to have a more extended and meaningful online sexual affair. Nevertheless, in light of the dynamic and restless nature of cyberspace, such brief sexual activities are very common. The illusory nature of cyberspace does not diminish the need to resort to the same illusory methods used in offline circumstances, such as faking cyber orgasms. Samuel Matthias has coined the term extimacy when referring to the simultaneous existence of the intimate and the exterior as they are facilitated by the internet. Extimacy is a kind of virtual intimacy, an abstraction of traditional intimacy, a closeness that nonetheless is far away. The pleasures and dangers of extimacy are also more abstract. Cybersex began with sexting and chat rooms, two-dimensional worlds where users manipulate avatars in virtual worlds like a god from above, or 3D first-person immersion in virtual worlds, sometimes augmented with the use of haptic devices that directly stimulate the genitals. These are called teledildonics. Recently, it looks pretty complicated, doesn't it? Recently, whole body suits hit the market. Haptic devices respond to the interactive signals of the users as they inhabit an image in a virtual world that has sex with another image, which is inhabited by another user or an artificial intelligence. It is possible, of course, to use the haptic devices as a real person having sex with another real person. Some couples who live apart are finding these new technologies a boon because they allow for long-distance sexual experiences that feel real. One person pushes and pulls, and the user feels the push and the pull. The user can feel as if they are penetrating or as if they are being penetrated. One can have sex and feel like one is having sex with literally anything one can imagine. Smart textile, as it's called, that works as a motion sensor and sensory applicator, can record its wearer's temperature and movements in three-dimensional space and deliver sensations to different parts of the body. This simulates the entire set of sensations involved in an erotic act. The possible combinations of technologies and scenarios for sex far exceeds the 31 flavor choices of Baskin-Robbins. Like real-world relationships, cybersex can involve both sex and love, or it can keep them apart. Unlike real-world relationships, fantasy and anonymity play a much larger role. When we study tech-mediated sex, we cannot help but think about how real-world relationships also conceal fantasy in their construction and their maintenance. Of course, Lacan was onto this when he defined love as deception, because it involves giving what one does not have to someone who will enter into a mirage relation in which he convinces him of being worthy of love. That's his quote. In any case, cybersex generates possibilities that do not exist in the so-called real world, projection and fantasy performing the heavy lifting. Should love follow upon the heels of cybersex, or in fact result without any kind of sex at all, as say with catfishing, the creation of a false online identity to lure someone into a romantic relationship, it may end up being a relationship that exists between two complete fictions who may or may not reveal their real-world identities to one another. Digitally liberated from the constraints of their real-world identities and bodies, persons engaging in cybersex can not only play out sexual fantasies they might never try in the real world, but they can experiment with gender as well. Any user can potentially have many sexual experiences through many gender configurations. As one patient who identified as a straight man with robot interests who loved cybersex told me, what it lacks in presence, it makes up for in fantasy. I can be anything I want, straight, bi, trans, gay, male, female, whatever, or even invent some crazy combination that no one has thought of yet. I can be an animal, a cartoon, a sex doll, or a robot, or any animal or alien from outer space. Only one thing is needed: matching my interest to a person on the other side of my firewall. It's like being on television where you can see yourself acting out your own fantasies, only you're also interacting with the characters on the screen, including yourself. Emblematic of cybersex and the digital age is the avatar, which you see here, the red-hot thread running through the uncanny domain of cyber, properly defined as an incarnation of a deity. That's the definition of avatar. A variant or version of a basic entity, and of course, a manipulatable digital image. A self-creation that can act on behalf of the self while remaining separate from it. The avatar implicates the user as a god who enjoys multiple incarnations. The avatar and the virtual world reflect the earnest work of omnipotent fantasy. The user has an interactive relationship with the avatar as self and not self, affected by and affecting its use in the virtual realm. There, the user, come avatar, may do all the things forbidden or impossible in the real world. Yet, in a sense, those things are happening in the real world, albeit on a computer screen. Something is being normalized that can only be done because the virtual exists. Though the freedom of multiple embodiments does not suffer from the constraints of real-world bodies and selves, it is naive to believe that such freedom does not affect real-world experience. For example, the possibility of addiction to virtual reality, which may appeal far more to users than the pleasures of the real world. A patient of mine confessed to me that he had become addicted to catfishing. Insight clearly did not suffice, nor the fact that the deception made a three-dimensional relationship impossible. My patient had become intoxicated by the power of his fantasies and the illusory and omnipotent sense of mastery that they offered him. Any satisfaction he might have derived from a real-life encounter paled in reaction in comparison to the pleasure he gained from being someone else online. I learned from this patient, as well as from other patients addicted to the internet and to internet porn, just how difficult it can sometimes be for psychoanalysis to compete with the virtual world. Along this line, it is worth mentioning that hentai, a Japanese or originated animated form of pornography, was the most popular search category on Pornhub, the world's top internet porn search engine. This is a very benign hentai image. I didn't want to, they can get very, very graphic. I'll describe them. Hentai is Japanese for changed or strange figure, denoting a metamorphosis, abnormality, or sexual perversion. That's the definition that the originators give of it, hentai. Graphically, sexual, phantasmagorical, often violent, and sometimes grotesque, hentai portrays huge genitalia, physical anomalies, tentacle sex, graphic hermaphroditism, transhuman creatures, sadomasochism, and coupling of all kinds. Hentai is fantasy, freed from the laws of physics and morality. Any combination of human or animal, monster or machine can be used in its depictions. Shame, often associated with porn usage, may be mitigated for users since the animated figures are not real. Furthermore, because it is animated, the only limits to hentai illustrations are the limits of the imagination. It is noteworthy that the most popular porn site for Americans for the first time is one that features no humans. That's something I think that we should pause and think about. The goal seems to be to make real sex and virtual sex indistinguishable from one another. Sex as anything one wants it to be without the physical presence of another. Sex as pure fantasy. This kind of deification of desire can easily become addictive, and it draws analytic attention to the eroding boundary between the real and the virtual, the authentic and the constructed, reality and simulation, and by extension, to psychoanalytic concerns around pathologies of selfhood, in which decentering, dissociation, dehumanization, objectification, and substitution occur. I want to add that sex work, too, has gone virtual. OnlyFans, an online content sharing platform linked to Instagram and launched in 2016, has over 50 million registered visitors. While OnlyFans creators can upload any kind of content, the platform became highly popular with sex workers, and mostly men pay monthly fees to view imagery too explicit for Instagram. If they add tips, they can direct message the women and receive photos and videos created on demand. Some think OnlyFans is a feminist sex worker's dream. The erotic influencer, as they're called, has complete freedom regarding what she chooses to exhibit and how she wishes to interact with her fans. She is a model, a performer, a creative artist. Most of all, she is a businesswoman. Instagram takes 20% of what she owns, but the most popular of the influencers can make up to $100,000 a month. Here are some of the most popular. In addition, the OnlyFans platform for sex workers has a built-in safety net. The influencers are no longer beholden to pimps or porn managers. They do not need to touch or be touched in real life, and they are not in danger of violence or abuse, STDs, or COVID. The risk they take has to do with the loss of anonymity, yet not all women experience this as a risk because many enjoy the exhibitionistic and performative aspects of OnlyFans. One of the intriguing discoveries about OnlyFans is that subscribers don't always pay more for increased nudity or sex acts. In fact, many appear more interested in seeking intimacy than sex. After all, porn is free on the internet, and orgasm is the goal of porn watching. With OnlyFans, orgasm is not necessarily the center of sexuality. What the men get from OnlyFans that porn doesn't offer is an illusion that they are in a relationship with the woman. It is ongoing and it is interactive. Into this roiling scene, the robots now enter. As if human identity is not faced with enough challenges to its assumed veracity. Yet what time could be better? As we begin to join our machines, it is only natural that forms of them are made to varying degrees in our own image and should begin to walk among us. Throughout our history, we have made ourselves through sexual reproduction, and now we make ourselves as machines, wired gods of a kind, smarter, faster, stronger, and potentially even more dangerous entities. Robots, either as moving or stationary machines, are already being used in nearly every arena of life. They care for the elderly. They teach children, they drive cars, they perform surgery, they maintain homes, they defuse bombs, they explore space, they build machines, fight crime, help wage war, surveil targets, cook food, act as pets, play musical instruments, and play unbeatable chess. With the rapid improvement of AI, they will soon be doing all these things better and adding new abilities to their repertoire. They are beginning to become our good friends, and a subset of them are already becoming friends with benefits. Currently, 4 manufacturers are already making lifelike robotic sex dolls worldwide, which will eventually replace and succeed the sex dolls that you've seen earlier, making a lot of lonely people, mostly men again, we can talk about the gendered aspect to this, a lot less lonely, though perhaps less human in the way we currently understand the term. McMullen, whom I've mentioned before, added Realbotics, the company's branch that makes Real Doll X, like iPhone X, a real doll with a robotic head controlled via Bluetooth through an Android app. A Real Doll owner can upgrade their doll by ordering the head. I told you that Dave Cat did that. McMullen's first such robotic doll is called Harmony. You see her here. She talks, she blinks, she smiles, she recalls aspects of its owner's life and is eager to have sex. Quote, she is being hailed as the most significant development thus far in the $50 billion sex tech industry, which is growing at an annual rate of 30%. Not every enterprise can claim a 30% annual rate increase these days. Robotics has also created the first sex robot for women. Henry is said to welcome his owner home in a British accent. You can choose the accents, actually, but it comes with a British, and talk about their favorite TV show or movie and tell jokes. In addition, he remembers the words to their favorite love poem or song. Undoubtedly, sex robots and robot companions will enter the mainstream, just like their ancestors. The personal computer, the internet, and the iPhone. David Levy, an expert and roboticist, predicts that we will be marrying robots within a few decades. A claim that to many may seem outrageous until it is considered against some of the more recent real-world advancements taking place right now. He is not alone in his belief. Predictably, the battle over moral and ethical issues regarding robot sex and love has already begun, with one side touting the benefits of robot relationships, such as helping humans, ease loneliness, grant pleasure, even decreasing sex crimes, and the other side warning about the dangers, dehumanization, social isolation, and perversion. So I'm just going to conclude with a few words. Technology is, as it now encroaches into every aspect of life, is changing human reality and what it means to be human, including the way we view our sexuality and the way we engage in sex. Whatever we might personally feel about internet porn, the growing area of digisexuality and cybersex, and love and sex with dolls and robots, we must acknowledge that there's been a sea change in the expressions of human sexuality, largely brought about by the internet and AI. Noteworthy is the fact that humans are increasingly using advanced technology to distance themselves from humans or to replace in-person human-to-human sex. Object relating has become exactly that, literally relating to objects. In fact, researchers today distinguish between first-wave and second-wave digisexuals, whereas first-wave digisexuals used technology to mediate a connection with a human partner. Second-wave digisexuals are increasingly immersed in activity in which no human partner is present, or if they are, their presence is indispensable. I already mentioned the popularity of pornography without humans. It seems highly likely that the boundary between human and machine will fade until it disappears. This is known as the singularity, and that our species will eventually reach a point where what it means to be human hardly resembles what it has meant for 100 years. How many of you can tell the difference between the human and the non-human in this photograph? Not so easy. The changes that I have mapped out will call forth the very best and worst in humanity. Psychoanalytic practitioners, ignorant of the technological core of this upheaval and its profound effect on human sexuality and the human self, will be ill-equipped to help the post-human generations. The best we can do is inform ourselves, shifting our vision for distance in examining the sea change taking place around us, and for close-up as we address the lives of our patients. With the latter situation, we do a kind of dance whose steps we make up as we go along, to the best of our knowledge and the demands of our conscience. It is my hope that this exposition of the powerful connection between sex and technology strongly encourages psychoanalysts, and perhaps all of you as well, to be deeply aware of the impact of technology on their patients and on just people's social and sexual lives, and account for its practice of the discipline. In doing so, they will be extending a tradition that has always been aware of what may hide in plain sight. After all, the id, das Es, our primitive core that houses our basic instincts, was named by Freud after Grodek's book of the It, implying an impersonal aspect of human nature. In his 1927 paper on fetishism, Freud noted how the fetishist can replace a person with an object to attain sexual satisfaction and excitement. Harold Searles also wrote about the significance of the non-human environment from the beginning of life. And of course, Donald Winnicott taught us about the powerful attachments we develop as children to transitional objects. Even Martin Buber, known for his theory of the I-thou relation as one that is direct and mutual, and in which there is an acceptance of the other as a whole and equal partner in dialogue. He also postulated an I-it relation in which the other is regarded as a non-human thing, an object to be used. It is interesting for our present purposes that Buber maintained that both attitudes are necessary for human existence. He believed that the I-it relation provides the foundations for ordered civilization, technical accomplishment, and scientific progress. Indeed, Sherry Turkle noted in her book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other, that nowadays we are, quote, insecure in our relationships and anxious about intimacy, so we look to technology for ways to be in relationships and to protect us from them at the same time. The latest technological revolution is challenging nearly everything we believed about ourselves up until now, relating to humans or parts of humans as objects, or substituting objects for humans, has traditionally been associated with perversion. Teddy, a patient who was extremely addicted to S&M porn, asked me one day, how do I turn cleavage into a person? As more and more people become attached to and find pleasure from their technological devices, making it the norm, we may need to revise our theories of perversion or acknowledge that we are living in an age of perversion. I love this, the doll on her phone. This is my book, The Age of Perversion, Desire in Technology and Psychoanalysis and Culture, where I address these larger issues and give a lot of case examples. People who engage technology lifestyles as extreme as some of those mentioned here are still a minority, but If civilization retains enough stability through the existential threats now facing it, this will change as we continue to merge with our machines in our forever war with natural limitation. Psychoanalysis must track this transition into the post-human age, anchored in its analysis by what may remain invariant in the human psyche through the change, the need for safety, the need for love, the desire to be more, to understand, to save one's circumstance, to make meaning, and so forth. As to what will constitute the good life in this new age, as of yet, no one has a clue. So I'm just going to end with the words of Dave Cat. He said, "At the end of the day, everyone deserves someone who they can love and who will unconditionally love them back. If that someone happens to be made of silicone flesh and metal joints or assembled in a factory with a mechanical interior and advanced AI, the sentiment remains the same." Thank you.
Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, they can raise their hand, or also it's possible to type the question in the chat and I can read it aloud. I can start with a question. What do you think about the difference between internet web browsing and internet addiction and literary practices? Both consist primarily of reading, but the former might be like a prison of unlimited subjectivity, where the latter might be healing. I think that reading like a long novel is an investment in human intelligence, because there's the unconscious framework of the writer and the writer's style in staging various beliefs. And something like a love bond or transference can develop between the reader and the writer, whereas reading on the web or web browsing is maybe more autoerotic withdrawal. But I'm especially interested in your use of the word mechanism, and if you think that there's a difference between the internet addiction and literature, where the former is maybe anti-human or mechanizing enjoyment in a way that the latter is not.
Yeah, I think you answered it there at the end. Look, we can become addicted to anything, really. But the thing about internet addiction, and there are different kinds of internet addiction. Today, I talk more about the sexual aspect of internet addiction, but people can be addicted to all kinds of non-human, forms. I think we can fall in love with literary characters. I think we can, like you said, fall in love with an author. But these are real people. They might be creating fictions that we fall in love with. And one of the things I said is that there are similarities. I'm presenting these forms of new sexuality, new love. But I believe one of the things that I discovered by studying them is that they do reveal something about how humans love or have sex even without this. Because we bring enormous amount of fantasy and projection into our relationships. And I think by studying people who have doll partners or engage in catfishing or robot love. There's so much, the fantasy there is so much more obvious. The projection there is so much more obvious. But these things exist in any love relationship. You think of people who fall in love and go out with someone for a few months. You've probably all had this experience. And after a few months, they say, you know, who was I with? Who was this person? Well, who you were with was, you know, an object of your fantasy. And then over the time, you got to know the real person and you realize this isn't the person you want to be with. So we bring these, this is a natural predilection of human beings, is to bring our needs, our fantasies, our desires, and project them onto another person, literature, and technological devices and creations. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Claire I can read aloud. It says, I'd be interested in knowing how it plays out also with dolls, as in toys for children, projecting maternity, etc.
Eternity?
I think maternity. It's
Maternity.
maybe there's a typo, but I think maternity.
Maternity. Okay. Claire, where are you? Can I see you? There you are. Hi. Well, I think it's very connected. I think it's very connected, and it shows if anybody has doubts about these kinds of attachments in adulthood, all you have to do is look at children and see how attached they are to their dolls, to their teddy bears, to their blankets, to their, you know, all of these inanimate objects, and how much they project into these objects and need them as you know. So it's interesting. You want to look at the maternal aspect of the child, you mean, or what the child sees in the object. It can go both ways. So, for example, Winnicott talked about teddy bears or transitional objects as being critical for children and helping the child separate from the mother or tolerate separation from the mother. So mom can't be available 24/7. And if she is, that probably isn't the greatest idea either, because the child needs to separate and individuate and become their own person. But it's a difficult separation. So one of the things that eases that separation is the attachment to a being, a thing that they attribute these maternal qualities to. The mother soothes, the mother comforts. Well, now the teddy bear soothes, the teddy bear comforts, right? So it becomes this in-between substitute for the mother, and it is attributed these maternal properties, and now the child can tolerate being on its own and not having to be with the mother. So you can see from very early on, we have these relationships with things, and those things, those objects, are important for our development, alongside the importance of human beings for our development. Then there's the other side of children who play out the mother with their dolls, right? I don't know if that's what you meant. Is that what you meant? No, you meant the first thing that I talked about? You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, both sides are interesting, I guess. It's kind of like a loop type of behavior then? Like,
yes. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your answer.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to ask a question? I can ask another one.
I'm surprised that people don't have more questions. I threw so much out at you. Was it too much? Was it new? Was it, oh, we already know this? Are you thinking about things, or what intrigues you about what I covered here? I usually have tons of questions.
My ability to ask questions is a little bit limited because I'm at work. But I would ask, what do you think, as far as including dolls into like a objective order of subjectivity? I mean, as erotic actors, I mean, there's not really like empirically discoverable characteristics in a sex doll, like ethical decision making or like inspiration. But do you think that the sex doll will like widen the concept of objectivity?
Well, some people are arguing to include, just in terms of preference. Some people prefer blondes or brunettes or this or that, and they want to include sex dolls as a type of object choice or sexual preference or love preference to be included in that. As far as the morality and ethical aspect, people are talking a lot about not just whether this is ethical, but whether, with dolls and with robots, we need to have some ethical standards in how people treat their dolls and their robots, because people, can be destructive, can be abusive, and because it's an object, they might feel more at liberty to mistreat and exploit a doll or a robot. And so there are some people who are talking about developing standards for the ethical treatment of dolls and particularly robots.
Hello, hi, Danielle. Great talk. I was wondering about dolls and body. I don't know if it makes sense, but I wanted to share about Deleuze in Guattari. There is a concept. It's a body without organs, and it's
Without
possible.
what?
It's a body without organs. Yeah,
I don't
I don't know
understand
if
the
you.
word. Body
Yeah,
without,
without organs. Are you right
write it for
here?
me.
Yeah, because
Without
I was.
organs.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's yeah. My question, and I wonder if it's possible to think the dolls. It's like this body. It's kind of another body of another organization of body. How we can think another kind of these bodies and devices in these times. Thank you.
Yeah, a body without organs.
Yeah.
Well, that is one of the main differences, because we as of now, we are sentient beings. We are bodies with organs, and the organs age, and we eventually die because of our aging process. As I showed you, Dave Cat is living with a doll, and the body was replaced now 4 times. Medicine is advancing due to technology, so that now we have heart transplants, liver transplants, but there's just so far that can go. But certainly technology is extending our lives and extending our sensoriums, extending our bodies and what we can do. But nonetheless, we are still in these finite bodies. And so I think that one of the attractions to the dolls, to the robots, is that, they do not have those limitations that we have. And maybe just by association, it makes us feel also as if we transcend our own limitations. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Laura. I can read it aloud if you prefer.
Where is Laura? Can I see her? Here she is. Yes.
I can read it aloud. Is more insight on how the sex doll isn't objectification of women would be interesting.
Okay. Well, there is how it isn't or how it is. Unmute.
The question is isn't.
How it isn't. Okay. Well, this is an argument with the sex dolls, that there is an ultimate object. It's okay. It's okay. That it's the ultimate objectification of women. It's going to the point where the woman is literally an object. It's not just a human woman being objectified. It's like, we don't need women anymore. We'll just go for the object of a woman. And a lot of the men who I've interviewed who live with dolls and who choose dolls have had disappointments with women, or are even too afraid to approach women. And some of them are very anti-woman, one could say, the incel group who speaks very negatively about women. And they've entered the doll community more recently, and there's some conflict around that. But on the other hand, a lot of the men who I've interviewed who live with dolls, who love their dolls, some of them marry their dolls, there's an enormous gentleness and affection and respect for the doll. Like I said, there's this line that is very fine, that they know it's a doll. They'll take off the head to show me the mechanics of the doll. But when they speak about the doll, it's like it's a human person. And it's as if they're in a relationship with another human. And that's how, fantasy and projection and illusion are so much a part of who we are. And storytelling, we tell ourselves stories all the time. And they can be based in reality, and many of them are not. But definitely there is an issue about the objectification of women in our society and our culture as a whole, that allows, that explains perhaps more why males are attracted to these dolls much more than women. There are many more female dolls. There are very few male dolls. The women who buy the dolls, a lot of them are artists. You saw in that one where I showed you and I asked you, can you tell the difference between the doll and the human? That's an artist who uses sex dolls in her artwork. And other female artists whom I've met do the same. So it's less for a sexual relationship than or a love relationship than it is for males. So it's something to think about, why that gender split. But I think it's going to become less so as people are becoming more comfortable with not just dolls, but with digital bots. And we find that a lot of females are also drawn to digital bots and develop relationships with them. So for example, Replica this site that offers digital so-called friends, and sometimes these friends become more intense lovers, attract women as well as men. And there's no body, no organs, no body. It's just an avatar. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question from Danielle. I can read it out loud, or you can read it, whichever you
Danielle,
prefer.
do you want to unmute?
Yeah.
Hi.
I was thinking in relation to posthumanism, if perversion is always going to be conceived as something human, or is sex tech always going to be anthropocentric, or can we imagine a non-anthropocentric sexuality
I'm having a little
in
trouble
relation to
hearing you.
technology?
I think your question is important, but I only got a few words. Can you write it out?
It
Yeah.
is written out,
Oh, it
Yeah.
is written out in the
or there are
chat.
two questions written out. You can see.
Where is that, Danielle? What is objectified in sex dolls are the qualities of human relationships that their owners can't find in other people, or they believe they can't find it, or they haven't tried to find it for whatever reason. Intimacy is what is abstracted and turned into an object. Is sex tech always going to be centered around the human, or can we imagine a situation where perversion is conceived as something separate from our anthropocentric? Well, sex tech, the way I'm talking about it, it's not always centered around the human. It's actually directed at non-human, and I have another talk that I gave on the disappearance of the body in sex, and how we're progressively moving away from the human body in sexuality. But I think you're asking, will we move completely beyond kind of even imagining the sexual object as a human? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, in a post-human context.
In a what
For
context?
the post-human.
Post-human. Yeah. Post-human, we're moving beyond the human body. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do. That's one of the things AI is trying to do. It's trying to go beyond any limitations that we've had in the past. Our bodies are what limit us. Our minds, our bodies, we are limited beings. We'd like to live, to believe that we can go beyond in so many ways. And we do go beyond with our technological advancements, with our imagination. But how far beyond we will go, that is the question. And I don't know that anybody knows that in the present. But maybe you have an idea of where we're going to. I mean, we use the human because that's our point of reference. We are human, and so this is our point of reference. So even when we create non-human partners, they have a humanoid form. So the sex dolls, the sex robots, even the avatars, they have a human shape, and because we are creating them in our likeness, but they are not human, even though we're creating them to look somewhat like we do. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm interested in the anthropomorphization in social ontology, and this is a good example of how to treat that question of that topic.
Yeah, I mean, the post-human is very, very important here because we're moving more and more and getting more and more comfortable with post-human. This is our world. We're becoming more and more comfortable. Many people are more comfortable with their devices than they are with a human being. So we're moving away from the human to the post-human, even though we're creating human aspects to that post-human. You know, so this week they said ChatGPT will speak. They're adding speech to ChatGPT, so we're gonna be able to converse with it, hear its voice. It's gonna have a voice, not just print out, and that makes it closer to human, and that will make us who use ChatGPT be more and more compelled by the humanoid aspect of it. We can be fooled by it. I gave a talk on AI a few weeks ago in Iran, and one of the people in the audience said to me, you know, I must have mentioned that, you know, ChatGPT doesn't have emotions. And she said, I disagree with you, it has emotions. And I said, well, what makes you think that? And she said, well, I went on ChatGPT and I was very affectionate and loving towards it, and it sent me a heart emoji. And I said, so that for her was a proof that ChatGPT, this AI creation, has emotions. Instead of seeing it, that it's an algorithm. It knows that if you're going to express yourself emotionally and affectionately to it, it will respond in kind. So, but it's easy to be fooled. And the more sophisticated it becomes and the closer it becomes to being like humans, the more easily we will be fooled by it. And that's what I mean by moving into a post-human world. I also mean that because we are combining our bodies with technology more and more, you know.
Can I just add?
Yes.
I bet you're familiar with the work of Kathleen Richardson from UK.
Patrick Richardson?
From UK, yes. She worked extensively about with sex and robots. I was listening to her at a conference in Denmark in 2017 where she had a huge panel discussion and a day seminar actually at the conference. And it was one of the most visited, the most controversial, and you know, the panels that received the most attention by the audience, because she was very bold in her presentations in the way how she thinks sex with robots will affect existing gender relations. She had some kind of prediction studies that it reflects and propagate and reflects and propagate and reflects and propagate, and that at the macro level is just reaffirming those object or human-shaped object relations. That the straight man, she worked dominantly with some predictions with straight men. She had some analysis where she included approximately 88 men that are having those relationships with sex robots, in a sense that she wanted to prove the argument that we are just reaffirming a worldview that is problematic. And we are actually supporting those relations, those plethora of female-shaped options.
Write me her name in the chat so I know, because I don't think I'm familiar with her. Okay.
And you know, she has a campaign currently, or since 2018, with Erik Billing from the University of Skövde in Sweden. And they have a campaign, actually. The campaign is it's also going along with a petition
Oh, I know
she's
that.
not,
Yeah, I do
you know that one? Yeah,
Yes.
she's part
Yeah.
of it. She
So
doesn't
she's
want the
the-
ban. She wants only regulation.
Yes, yes. I mentioned that there are people who are looking for regular. So it's her, there are two people, her and the guy from Sweden. Yeah.
Yeah, mainly two, but there is a whole network behind, but I
yeah.
will send details.
Yeah. Yeah. And how was the audience? Were most of them agreeing with her, or were there some who were arguing against her position?
You know, the whole discussion went into direction. It was part of this robo-philosophy, very well known conference organized in Aarhus in Denmark. And then the whole conversation went in the direction of, would that decrease the trafficking? Would that cause less harm that we are actually registering, or police is registering with prostitution or not? And her argument was that it will enhance instead of, because when you are allowing those type of interactions, and she was showing clearly the interaction, which were interactions of submission, dominance, right? Mainly. And then she was heavily attacked by the audience. But I think there were two philosophers that I really like, David Gunkel and Mark Kuckelberg, that went into debate and somehow saved the whole debate, in a sense, like, you know, with this argument, why you shouldn't hit the robot? Because it's at the bottom end, it's ethically referring to yourself. It's about yourself. It's not only about the robot or how we treat the inanimate objects. So everything ended up with their relational turn.
Yeah.
So the debate was somehow saved.
Yeah, I mean, there is this debate that's come up with me many times when I speak about this. You know, there are people who say, well, allow the robot sex or the doll sex because pedophiles or rapists will take it out on the dolls and not on humans. But nobody knows for sure. And it was almost impossible to have a study on that to see whether that's really the case. Some people say yes, some people say no, like she does. She says it'll just enhance that need or that desire. But we don't know. There's no way of knowing at present whether that's the case.
He had some research.
All I know is, let me finish. All I know is that when I interviewed Matt McMullen and I asked him were there any dolls he wouldn't make, he said that some people ask him to make child sex dolls and he refuses, but in China they make them, they have no problem making them. So they do exist and they're easy to access.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Shreya. It says, I missed the beginning and maybe this is already discussed, but do you think that tech and sex dolls is further proof of atomization of people in hyper-capitalist societies?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think these sex dolls are, first of all, they're expensive. So you won't find them in societies that are not wealthy. They cost a lot. And you know, they can cost up to, you know, $10,000 more with the AI in them. AI heads are $8,000 to add to the, you know, sex dolls. So there are different companies that charge less. The Chinese companies, for example, Russian companies charge less. But I'm curious what you're thinking about in relation to the capitalist societies. Can you say a few words about that? Shuli. I like your hamsa.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just thinking it kind of reflects a lot of, you know, maybe people become more socially isolated with technologies, like how we see with telephones, we see with increased capital, you know, the breakdown of the family unit happens. People become more and more individualistic. Arguably, a lot of like gender and sexuality developments and, you know, progression has happened also in a lot of these societies. And it just, I missed the beginning of the talk, unfortunately, but it just, when I joined, it felt to me like, would this be considered something that's more of an issue of isolation and social awkwardness that's happening?
Yeah. I think that's a good question, and I think it is. You know, we have a loneliness epidemic in our country, in Japan, in a lot of the countries that are the most advanced technologically. And so we think that technology connects us, which it does. Technology is about connection, but it doesn't mean it's about conversation. It doesn't mean it's about relationship. We can connect, people can have connections or you know, thousands of Facebook friends, but it doesn't mean that they have a close friend if they're sick, or if they need someone to help them out with their dog when they go away on vacation. You know, those closer relationships. It just means online you have all these faces like now, and I can't even see your faces, which upsets me that you're not showing me your faces. I have to wonder, why is that? Why can't I have a face-to-face dialogue with people who are talking to me? To me, that's a little jarring, because I grew up in a different generation. And you know, when I'm a professor, I require my students to actually show themselves. Otherwise, I don't even know if they're there. I don't, you know, it's just a furtherance of the digitization of our society. But I agree with you, Shiri, that it's happening more in the more the societies that are more using advanced technology. But you know, you can go anywhere, even in the poorest countries. They have cell phones. You know, everybody has cell phones now. Everybody can be connected now. But I agree that there's a bi-directional relationship there, that the more, one of the things they find is that the more people are online, the more people spend on social media, the lonelier they are. The lonelier they claim to be. So they're always seemingly in interaction with others, but they end up feeling lonely because it's a different kind of interaction. It's not the same kind of interaction that one has when one is in person with another human being. So I do think that it encourages more and, you know, more of that. And people become used to that and feel anxious and socially anxious about dealing with real people now. So I didn't mention that people are having less sex now than before, than previous generations. So you'd think with all this porn and sexuality and sexual images that people are having more sex, and it's not true. 30% of males under 30 have never had sex, never. You know, in Japan, also highly technologized society, a third to a fourth of young people, I'm talking about young people, a third to a fourth of young people have never had sex, and they choose not to have sex. They call themselves herbivores. So, and what takes the place of that? Technology. So there's an inverse relationship between intimacy, sexuality, and technology.
Thank you. And also, I'm going to leave at noon, but that doesn't mean that the session needs to end. I just want to say that in case this next question goes past noon.
No,
This
I
is
can't
a
go
question.
past, I can't go past that either. So we
Okay.
have 10 minutes, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, there is one other question in the chat from Simon. I can read it aloud if you prefer. I can read it. Thank you very much. According to Lacanian psychoanalysis, perversion is the result of denying the name of the father. Is the relationship / sex with the doll somehow a result of this? Or is this the result of mother and child relationship? I mean, the need request relationship before the intervention of the father's name.
Well, I'm not a Lacanian, as I mentioned. I know in Lacanian psychoanalysis, psychosis is a result of denying the name of the father. I'm not sure about perversion. So that might be somewhat different. But let me just see what I can say about mother versus father and perversion. So I see my definition, as those of you who heard my talk, my definition of perversion, there's the traditional definition of perversion, which is the Freudian definition, which is the denial of the difference between the sexes. And I think Lacan continued believing that. And a lot of, if you think of certain perversions, mostly male, are a way of, so let's say a woman who, a male who can only have sex with a woman who wears high heels. Okay, it's a fetish. Can only have sex with a woman who wears high heels. The Freudian interpretation of that would be that this man cannot tolerate the female genital and therefore has to give the woman a symbolic male genital, the high heel, the spike heel, in order to be able to approach her. Can't tolerate that there is a difference between the genders and the sexes. I think that in today's world, one of the things that becomes more perverse is not just the intolerance of the difference between the sexes, but the difference between human and non-human. So that relates to some of the questions that people have been asking before, is what is human? What makes us human? What is non-human? And some of these post-human relationships really involve the blurring of the boundary between human and non-human, just like the earlier definition of perversion was the blurring of the boundary between male and female. And I see perversion, just like technology, as wanting to break down boundaries, as wanting to go beyond limits. So it's not all, I don't see it necessarily as always a negative thing or a pathological thing. I think we all have that in us. It's part of our humanity, is that we want to transcend our limitations. And perversion does it in one way, and technology does it in another way, and sometimes they overlap. I don't know if I answered you, but I'm not a Lacanian, so I can't address exactly how Lacan would answer that question. One more question or comment?
Any other questions or comments, or any last remarks from you?
I'm going to go to the earlier one. Danielle de la Tour, who says what is objectified in sex dolls that aren't in real people. And I think what people look for, Danielle, is the control, first of all, that one can control a doll one cannot control a human. You can try, but you can't. You can control a doll. They feel that the doll will not reject them, whereas humans can reject them. So they're less vulnerable in that way. They feel that the doll is always there. So it's like, it's not like humans who come and go, that there is a continuity, what I'm saying is that these are the things that people don't find with humans. Human relationships are messier. They require compromise, right? No two people are exactly on the same page. I like the room hot, you like the room cold. Well, how are we going to work that out if we're going to live together? That's just a quick example, but even sexually, I might have some preferences. My partner might have different preferences. How do you work that out? With a doll, you don't have to compromise. Like, this is what I want, this is what I'll get. And so there's all kinds of aspects of human relationality that require effort, that require frustration tolerance, that require separation, the ability to deal with separation, that require, a certain ego resilience, that people sometimes who turn to these objects, those relationships don't require all of those things, right? Because now I'm in control. I'll have sex when I want. She's always there. Nobody's going to criticize me. She's not going to leave me. All of the things that can happen in a human-to-human relationship, which makes us more vulnerable, of course, in human-to-human relationships, but it also, there's something interesting about compromise. We grow from those compromises, from acknowledging a person's difference, from seeing what, how do we negotiate these things? Can I grow from where I am, or do I stay exactly the same? So those are the one could say the disadvantages of being in a relationship with a doll, is it only goes so far, because being in a relationship with another human requires of us to grow, to go against another human being, to listen, to take into account another person's needs and desires, and to deal with frustrations, separations, lack of continuity, lack of gratification when we want it, right? That's what we supposedly develop as we become adults, but some people have more difficulty with that. And the doll is a way of managing, wanting the intimacy, wanting to feel they're in a relationship, but not having to compromise in the way one would have to with a real human being.
Thank you very much. There is another comment from Danielle in the chat. If you have a moment to take a look,
Yeah.
I'm going to step out, but thank you very much.
Okay, bye. As I understand, objective.
Yeah, it was a point of an objectification or deification, that it is a process of abstraction and the rationalization of that what is abstracted. And in this case, the fetishes and perversions are turned into objects when they were previously undifferentiated. And that's basically the point, that new qualities are abstracted in the process of advancement of these forms of fetishes.
You're talking about commodification.
Yeah, it was just a remark on objectification and clarification with relation to your talk.
I have trouble understanding you. I'm really sorry. Abstractions are turned into objects. Yes, abstractions are turned into objects. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go because I have another appointment. But thank you all for listening and for offering your questions. And I hope it made you think, not just in an abstract form, but also about your own relationships, because it has ramifications for all of that society, where we're heading, but also how do we relate, each one of us? What do we look for in intimacy? What do we look for in a partner? How do we understand people who look for more non-human interactions, and what that means for our future? Okay.